Chris, thanks for joining us. Tell us about the how AUKUS might affect your industry and Australia.
Well, I suppose the biggest impact is, or the biggest question is whether the subs deal is going to go ahead, because what we're seeing is the US saying that their output is around 1.1 sub per year. And so they won't have enough of these big nuclear subs for themselves, let alone for Australia. I think the output has to be around 2.3 subs a year for even the US to get its quota of subs in the water. So it's a issue around the fact that there's not enough people in the US, not enough workers available since COVID to build enough submarines at the volume that they actually need for their defense system. And so if the US can't make its own quotas, it puts Australia in a precarious position. And that's what the US review is about.
Mm.
Now, this adds to another issue, and that is, if you look back at the history of us doing the deal with the French, and then with Scott Morrison withdrawing that deal in favour of AUKUS for building submarines, we've lost a lot of money. We paid, it was around $835 million in for pulling out of the French subs deal. There was a kind of penalty. We've also, in February, paid $500 million down payment on the AUKUS subs. We're going to maybe lose, depending on what happens, let alone the defence issues, about $1.3 billion on that alone. I think we need to get an explanation from some of the people who were involved. This is just a huge amount of taxpayers' money, and we want it to be used on defence, perhaps, but not just wasted away. I think the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, should explain why he agreed to a clause in the AUKUS deal, which meant that if the US pulled out of it, out of the subs deal, then any money that Australia's outlaid would lose. Imagine, Mike, if you offered to buy my house and I said, great, give me the deposit. Just let you know, in case I go cold on the deal, I keep the deposit. And no right-minded person would be in agreement like that. But we are in that agreement with AUKUS, and we would lose that money for a start, as well as being left pretty defenceless or with no plan B to go ahead. So we've got that, and also the current government, when they put that down payment in February, they should explain, did they try and get that clause removed? Because it's just totally wrong that if one party pulls out of the deal, then it's on the other party's owners to pay up for the shortfall that's occurred. So we've had that with AUKUS, but the backdrop of this, of course, goes further into our relations with the US when it comes to these transactional arrangements. Now, this is not, I'm not talking here ideology or politics, but just the commercial transactions and the way that they're going. And should we start to be looking a bit more carefully at our digital sovereignty and our generally, so that we can, as a country, get the biggest bang for our buck when it comes to either these defence contracts or commercially. So that's AUKUS. The other thing that I think is really interesting that's just happened is the big deal that Anthony Albanese announced with Amazon. Amazon are putting $20 billion in investments. Of course, being a commercial company, they'll expect to get their money back and more. But from what I've read, an additional $7 billion on $13 billion that was already committed to this. $13 billion will be spent on data centers with AI capability. There's also going to be 3 big solar farms in Victoria and Queensland. As you probably would know, data centers consume huge amounts of power and guzzle the huge amounts of water. I saw a figure there that suggests that by about 2030, 8% of our usage will be for data centers. It's just enormous.
But
And
it's all for the good, though, isn't it?
well, yeah,
It's not
well,
just being
we
facetious.
have to be, I guess, for all our business, our government departments, and all that. They really need to be involved in some kind of
Mm,
AI-driven data center, and Amazon is by far the biggest in the world. So I don't have any doubts that Amazon would, and, no criticism of Amazon for being in the deal, and neither that for the government wanting to be in a deal like that. But we need to look at our national sovereignty. There were companies that I'm told that Australian companies that would have liked to have been part of this. They may not have been able to do the whole of this. I think there is technology there that we really need the Americans for. But it has sparked a bit of a discussion about when we go into these deals that we have to start to also think about our own capacity to do some of this work so that we can get some of the profit back and not be too dependent on countries, including our closest ally, the US, and diversify a little bit. But certainly it is a big deal. And Innovation Oz has already reported that something like 10 agencies in the Commonwealth Government have announced between them something like $300 million dollars of spend under this new agreement. So already a number of federal
mm.
agencies are aboard this new deal with Amazon.
Can you tell me why they need such a? I mean, okay, let's tell us why they need such a large data center, and what does it do to what's surrounding it?
Look, I don't know exactly in terms of their dimensions, but I can say that there's a lot of concern about where they're placed and whether there is water resources and what the impact on those water resources would be. The reason that's the water, let alone the power, is needed is because data centers require a massive amount of cooling, and so
Mm,
that's partly why. I don't know about whether it's the size of the data center. It's the is the concern, but certainly the operation of data
mm,
centers is a big concern, and the guzzling of resources. And you'll find an unusual, well, not unusual, but you'll find an interesting alignment here. People who are concerned about, I guess, energy resources on the
mm,
one hand against this. So and people who are concerned about this financially in terms of sovereign capability. But having said that, as a technologist, yeah, I would salute Amazon as being incredibly capable of
mm,
doing the work that's required at the same time. But there is, that's the one of the caveats is that there is a need for us to think about whether other companies. We have all companies like the Goodman Group who um, are in the property industry, but have now said that they're going to be spending more than half their money on half their output on construction of data centers. Now, could they wouldn't be producing all the technology involved in it, but wouldn't could have they been involved in such a deal? Could we bring in some Australian firms to do some of the ancillary work around data centers and so on, so that we can increase our local employment and our
mm.
local wealth? Um,
Will it
I
create
just think that's good economically.
will it create jobs for, say, people in your industry or in other industries in Australia, or will it be still mainly US built, controlled, and so forth?
I'm not sure about who will control it. Um, Amazon has been on a big spree around the world on that. They've with similar offers. There's a $20 billion similar amount they've announced in Pennsylvania in the US, a $10 billion one in North Carolina, and they've announced a deal which involves power by nuclear reactors with Talon Energy.
Good luck
And
in Australia with that one.
yeah, it's an interesting debate because on the one hand, you've got the Dutton plan, and it had other issues around it, like the
Mm,
fact it was going to be publicly funded and there was limits on the amount of energy. But um, I was covering a conference by Oracle last year, and Allison basically said that they were going to trial having a small nuclear modular power station for one of their data centers. He didn't say exactly where, but he gave an idea of what they were going to do. And Amazon as well. So they see that. I think they're not really on a bandwagon. They just see that those small reactors might be viable for dealing with this big power issue. And that would be part of their funding themselves, part of their business model to be able to build and produce them. But yeah, we have, and most of the public are still not really aboard nuclear reactors in the country at all. That's right, and so they're building here the big
Mm.
solar panel farms, which
What
I
about
would
the
expect
time
would be
frame?
the answer here to that.
What about the time frame? Is this going to be another submarine deal? Sorry
It
about that.
won't be as bad as that. I don't think anything can be as bad as a submarine deal. I mean, that is, the we have to look at the decimal point in terms of badness.
But
I
time-wise,
think
time-wise,
this particular deal with Amazon, all I can say is that it seems to be a 4 or 5 year agreement. So presumably the data centers would be produced in that time. I don't think building a data center is hopefully nothing like the complexity of putting together a nuclear sub. They seem to be rolled out around the world without
mm.
too much problem. I don't think time frame is as big a problem in this case.
When they decided to build this, was it just that Jeff Bezos said between watching his favourite show on Prime, did he say, "Oh, we'll just build a bloody great big data centre in Australia," or was there a tendering process and had it been a plan of of governments before this?
Very good question, because I don't know of there's been no evidence in the people I've talked to. There, no one's really been aware of a tendering process around it. And as I suggested to you, even if we aren't really the right people to put together all the data center infrastructure and software and technology, that's Amazon's, ours, that's AWS's hallmark. There would be ancillary work around data centers, like actually just building the kind of shells of them and providing other services to them. That
Mm,
would be an option for Australian firms. So I think we have to try and maximize getting in on the action where we can for our own financial health
mm.
as much as anything else.
Yeah, I actually think it's probably you know, superficially, it looks like a good idea. I think it is the way of the world, but it's how you manage it. And then the intrusions into privacy. Does it allow too much intrusion? Can it be used for other nefarious activities? We haven't got enough time to talk about that, but government seems to want every piece of information on everything we do. And then look at the Australian government; they're going to flog it off to some private contractors. So um,
Yeah.
it's um, it's deserves another discussion, I think, and a coffee too one day because you're not far from where we are. You're near
No,
the
about 50 meters, I'm told
yes,
that even
you're
I
near
can
the,
walk 50 meters.
just make sure you fumigate yourself after coming near us.
Yeah,
um,
I might just very, very quickly mention Denmark in here, because
mm,
Denmark and the US have been, crossing swords over the Greenland issue, if you like.
mhm,
And the Danes have taken this issue of digital sovereignty really seriously. So they're actually not going to continue using Microsoft Word, Windows computers. They're going to use Linux and LibreOffice and stuff like that. And that comes out of a case where there was an executive order against the International Criminal Court prosecutor when he made some claims about the Israelis. And
mhm.
Trump's view was to instruct, I'm going by reports on this, I can't vouch for it, but Trump's view was to instruct Microsoft to disable his email account. So there's a bit of issues in some parts of the world, particularly Europe, on this issue of digital sovereignty as well.
Thank you very much.